It's recording now. Okay, so we're going to start now with our little handful of attendees, and hopefully we'll have more people, but otherwise we are recording this. And as I said in the earlier sign, anyone who has questions, please feel free to type them to us in the chat, and we will try to address them. Well, so I'm here at the Dora Maar house. I'm in my office, and Jacqueline is in London, but Jacqueline was here at one point last year. And we are, this is an artist residency program, the Dora Maar house. I think everybody in the audience knows that. And even Allison is a former fellow, a poet. Allison Funk is one of the people here in our audience. So I won't explain the program. I won't go into all those details, but I'll just say that we're doing these webinars pretty much once or twice a month. We started it obviously during this strange period where we couldn't get together, and we'll probably continue it because sometimes we were able to reach people from all over the world. And today we're going to talk with Jacqueline Bishop about her most recent book, but also about much of her work, because there it is, The Gift of Music and Song. Jacqueline was born in Jamaica, and she's now based in the United States and the United Kingdom. She's a writer and a visual artist whose most recent book, well, now it's not the most recent book, The Gymnast in Other Positions, was awarded the 2016 OCM Bocas Award in Nonfiction. She's also the author of the novel The River Song and two collections of poetry, Fauna and Snapshots from Istanbul. And she's also a visual artist. She's had exhibitions in several countries, and awards she has received include the Canute A. Broadhurst Prize for Short Story Writing, a year-long fellowship to Morocco, a UNESCO Fulbright Fellowship to Paris. She's an associate professor at New York University. And are you also teaching in London?
I am teaching in London.
That's what I thought, yeah. So Jacqueline, I want you to tell us, just to give us a little introduction about this book. What is it and how did it come to be?
Okay. So thank you, Gwen. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you.
We were chit-chatting before this, and I feel a little bit better knowing that it's cold in Provence. Like it's cold in London. And so this is a collection of interviews, the first such collection of interviews with Jamaican women writers across all genres, whether they are poets, whether they're fiction writers, whether they're children's story writers. This is a collection of 18 interviews with Jamaican writers, some of them who still call Jamaica home, and some of them who have left Jamaica, and one of whom, two of whom are no longer with us, Hazel Campbell, who knew the book was coming out, but didn't live to see it be published. And the last interview in the book is about Elliot Bliss, who was, we interviewed her biographer, and I was just so glad to be able to bring her home. She was born in, I think, 1800s or something like this, 1903 or something like that. And so this didn't start out as a book. It started out because of my training in oral history and a love of a good interview. That's how this all started out. And we're up to 7 interview attendees now. So I am very good friends with one of the women in the who was interviewed in the book, Sharon Leach, and she works at the Jamaica Observer, and she edits the bookend section of the Jamaica Observer. And we talked about just the lack of serious scholarly interviews with writers in general, but with women writers in particular. And so we started interviewing these women, just, to add to the archives of interviews that were out there. And before you knew it, all over Facebook, everywhere, people were saying this should be a book. And then the publisher came to us to make it into.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because you have a really unique style of interviewing, I think. Like, I could learn a lot from you. Because I feel like you just feel that you're on the side of the person you're talking to. That it's not that kind of like confrontational interview. It's really, you're with them. Did that develop from your oral history background, taking?
And yet, I get so much resistance oftentimes when doing the interviews, because writers, and now we're doing visual artists as well, resist looking very closely at their work. Not all writers, by the way, if I do not find your work interesting, I am not going to interview you.
Right. So already okay.
Yeah. So I am already on your side to the point that I want to interview you. And I also I'm very, very interested in fact, I would very much love to interview you, Gwen, for a variety of reasons. But I'm very much interested in the archiving of women's voice and women from the Caribbean's voice, because I am, among other things, a doctoral student. And so much of my work looks at the way that women become invisible, right? And women get, in trying to piece together how women become invisible, they're written out of, they're very strategic ways in which they become invisible.
Yes, absolutely.
And this is an attempt to confront that invisibility, to make it next to impossible to write these women writers out of invisibility.
While we're talking about just how the book came together, can you tell me a little bit about the cover? How that cover, what is the cover?
It's funny you should ask that, as we're talking about invisibility, right?
I thought so.
It's funny you should ask that, as we're talking about invisibility. Thank you very much, right? So I will put this up again, right? And so the cover, and I'll hold it here as we're speaking, is a textile work that was done by a woman in Jamaica. I will probably never know the name of the woman who made this work. I will probably never know this. But it's central to the work that the recovery work that I am doing as a doctoral student. And part of the work that I'm doing is looking specifically at certain traditions, needlework being one of them, that women engage in. Ceramics is another. And this was part of the work that I was doing when I was with you in Dora, Maar, and trying to understand how is it that these traditions disappear, right? And they disappear, just like women's voices, because they're not archived. They're not valuable enough to become archived. So it's not as though women aren't there and women aren't creating. It's not as though we don't have a good number of Jamaican women writers. It's that their voices, for the most part, are not archived. Their traditions as needleworkers are not archived. In the meeting that I had with my advisors, one advisor said, as we were talking, it's structured silences, it's structured absences, right? You can see in very specific places as women become invisible. So thanks for asking about that piece.
No, I thought it was related to the beautiful work you did while you were here. And if we have time at the end, we'll talk about it again. I wanted to start to say that the interviews really center around a place. Obviously, the place is Jamaica, it's sort of a geographic location, but it's also kind of a place in memory, because many of the people, what does it mean to write from inside Jamaica or outside Jamaica? I love that line that Olivia Olive Sr. said, where she wrote, "A writer's country is writing." I thought that was a beautiful quote. And I've also felt it myself as living in another country that it sort of sometimes gives you the distance, sometimes gives you insight. But I thought if you could talk to me a little bit about that theme of writing from exile, or writing in or on exile.
Right. I see Marjorie Bishop. I see my mother is here with us. So hello, hello. She says, Marjorie, I can hear. And sometimes I ask myself if indeed I would have left Jamaica if my mother hadn't left Jamaica. My mother left Jamaica for very practical reasons, all of which are documented in another book of mine, My Mother Who Is Me, Life Stories from Jamaican Women. And I'll just move on over and get it for you in 1 second.
Okay.
Here it is, My Mother Who Is Me, Life Stories from Jamaican Women in New York. Now, I think what you're talking about, Gwen, is the fact that when you are born in and you grew up in or spent significant amount of times in a place, I left Jamaica, I was a teenager already. I oftentimes say you leave, but you bring that place with you. And you're constantly negotiating that place against wherever it is that you go. You have a kind of a dual consciousness at all times, right? And even if you go back, because we have this sense of, oh, I very much want to go back to that place, then you bring this other place.
Right. You never really can get back.
Yeah, with you that you take back. And this is rife throughout this collection. Because for one reason or another, so many of the writers do not actually live in Jamaica, though we all consider Jamaica home, right? And I think the question is, well, what do you do? What do you do? And I can speak for myself. You just create out of those multiple places. It gives you more to create out of.
Right. And also there's the reasons for that kind of diaspora that are structural again and economic and,
and sadly, increasingly environmental.
Right. Exactly. In fact, when I was reading your book, there's such a rich heritage. And as you know, as I've told you before, Andrew Salke was a teacher of mine. And so to see him cited a few times by these women, it really it sort of, it meant a lot to me. And also I saw that you took a class with Paula Marshall.
Right. So I oftentimes feel that I got to NYU, still at NYU 20 odd years later. And I was really, really lucky because when I got to NYU, New York is a special place, right? The entire Caribbean. I oftentimes say I left Jamaica as a Jamaican and I became Caribbean in New York, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
When you're in Jamaica, your reality is Jamaican. But when you're in New York, you're forced to confront Haitian, Trinidadian, you become Caribbean. You have a Caribbean sense. And at a place like New York University, there were some of the Camo Brathwaite was there, Edward Sullivan was there, Paul Marshall was there, Edwidge Donticat was there. I mean, everybody who was who I really wanted to study with was at NYU. And I feel really lucky, because a lot of the things, I now have 7 books and I was dividing the books into 2, and 4 of the books are my creative work and solely mine, and 3 of them are like The Gift of Music and Song, which is about,
bringing these 2 voices together. Yeah,
that's right. As is My Mother Who Is Me, it's bringing the voices of other women in. And so I think that that's what NYU kind of gave me, was the sense of community, right? And New York does that. New York for all its issues, it engenders a Caribbean identity.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wish that you were still here because I wanted you to tell me what she was like, because her book, A Timeless Place, A Chosen People,
Yes,
it's
chosen.
one of my all-time favorite books. To me, it was kind of a revelation for me.
Right. So Paul Marshall was I took 2 classes with Paul Marshall. But she was also very useful for me outside of just being a teacher. At the time that I was at NYU, and I seem to always have this thing where I am betwixt and between trying to do my own creative work and trying to do community work.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
And so this actually might have something to do with my mother, actually, because much more so than my father, because my mother was heavily involved in Jamaican politics. And I actually grew up with her running around and trying to do a lot of political work and trying to help this one out and trying to help that one out. So I think that aspect of myself I got from my mother. And so so I'm always betwixt and between these 2 things. And Paul Marshall functioned in 2 ways. So on the one hand, she was my teacher. She's teaching me how to write good fiction, and calling me at home if I didn't show up in class or something like this.
Wow.
And on the other hand, I was as well trying to start a literary journal. I had come to NYU with this idea for a literary journal called Calabash, a journal of Caribbean arts and letters. And Paul Marshall was very instrumental in getting that journal off the ground at NYU and running for 10 years. And so she was very helpful, very stern woman, not to be messed with, you know.
But you know, that's a great journal. I mean, I knew that journal when I was way back then.
Very stern woman, but also seemed to recognize some of the things I was trying to do, and so I appreciated her for that.
That's wonderful. So going back to your book, the book we're talking about, I noticed that the women often mentioned the schools that they went to when they were in Jamaica. And this seemed to be important. And for an outsider, I don't know Jamaica well. These schools don't really signal anything. But I thought it's interesting that it's always mentioned that they went to, so can you tell me a little bit of why is that true? Is it important?
The schools signal a lot. The schools, and if you notice, the schools have names that link back to Oxford and Cambridge.
Right. Yeah.
British institution. In fact, a lot of the Jamaica is doing a lot of work these days to try and tackle elitism in its education system. Because especially when these women were going to school, and certainly when I was going there, it's a very, very elitist system. You had to take a special test. They've gotten rid of that test, and to get into these schools, and if you did not do extremely well on that test, you went to inferior secondary schools, and that just inculcated a sense of negativity in a whole generations of people who did not go to certain schools. And I personally would not have I had to go to Holy Child High School, and I chose Holy Child. Believe this, Gwen, not only because of the status that it accorded in my mind, but also for its uniform.
Yeah, no, of course, at that age, that's how we choose those things. I completely believe it. Tell me about the uniform.
Right?
Is it a good color?
I was not going to Campion because purple was ugly. And
Right.
I was not.
In your whole life is decided, right? It's really funny.
Mind you, these days I understand that Campion is ranked over Holy Child. And I was not going to Immaculate because I just couldn't take care of white. And Immaculate was all.
That's a very good choice. It would be best.
Right?
Yeah.
But Holy Child just had the best uniform ever.
Right.
And I had to go and one go at the exam and I passed.
Oh,
Right?
good for you.
Let me just say, my mother made sure I passed. We had extra lessons up the wazoo, right?
Yeah.
Your parents were paying extra. If they wanted you into a good school, there was a strong extra lesson tradition going on to get you into this school.
Yeah.
Let me just say something about these high schools. And you had, you know, some various co-ed schools, but most of the schools, it seems to me, they were single sex, all girls or all boys,
Right.
and you know, this kind of stuff. At Holy Child, you were really falling down. You were really a dunce if you went into the arts.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You were really a dunce if you went into the arts. If
So
you were
sciences.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were training you to be medical. They believed in you so much that you had to be, you had to say you were going to be a medical doctor. You were going to be a leader of industry.
An engineer.
Yes, you were really a dunce if you were in the arts. So here it is that I am at Holy Child High School. And I am going to grow up to be a writer and a visual artist, and I'm taking physics and chemistry, and it didn't go very well.
Yeah. No, it's so funny. That's so true. I just had that kind of conversation with my daughter, who was trying to be a scientist for a while, and then suddenly she took an English class, and she thought, "What am I doing?"
It didn't go very well.
Yeah. That's interesting, because I thought there must be this whole culture of the schools.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
The women sort of introduce themselves in your interview, and then they always mention where they went to school.
Oh yes. It's serious business. Serious business.
I was curious also about the question of writing in Patois. Is that a really big, as a writer, a Jamaican writer, is that a big question you have to confront, or do these writers go back and forth in their different pieces? They write different ways and sort of standard English and then Patois, or is it something that has to be grappled with?
I think it depends on individual writers. I think Derek Walcott is right about this, actually, when he says that the problem is not writing in Patois, and this is not in relation to the women in this book, actually. He says, the problem is that when people write in Patois, they tend not to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Right? The writer themselves, not the reader. So if you are going to write in Patois, you should give it the seriousness that you give it in standard English. And I think he's right about that. Because people tend to turn in the most juvenile things in Patois. Simply because it's in Patois. So it's something that we ought to think about. If you look at a writer like Olive Senior or Lorna Goodison, they write Hazel Campbell along a whole register, you know, from all out Patois to standard English.
Right.
And they do it very, very well. Right? But sometimes I'm reading none of the women in this book, let me just make that clear. And I think this is not serious writing, you know, because they don't treat Patois very serious.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah, there was some of them. I haven't read a lot of these women and their work in the book, but the interviews make me want to read them. And Olive Senior is one of the ones who I really want to go find her work. I also, like, as you mentioned in your introduction, was really drawn to the story of Elliot Bliss and the whole Creole's double alienation, I think that was brought up in that interview. This idea that you're from where you're from, and then you're not from the sort of home country, and how that. Can you talk about that a little bit? Explain the sort of.
I will talk about it a little bit. And let me just give a little plug to Michaela Calderaro. Maybe you might invite her on. She just had a biography published of Elliot Bliss. Now, my introduction to Elliot Bliss went like this, probably 20 years ago. I was putting together Calabash, and there was a little Italian woman, I didn't know it at the time, and the woman asked to meet with me one summer at NYU, and I went and I met her, and I'd never met her before, and her name was Michaela Calderaro, and she started talking, and you know how Italians are, they talk with their hands, you know. I always feel like I know Italians, they're just like Jamaicans. So, they love food and they talk with their hands, right? They're Jamaicans. And she was talking about Elliot Bliss, and I was like, what are you talking about, right? And she introduced me to a woman who had been a Jamaican writer, and I'd never heard of her before, right? And I had prized myself on knowing just about every Jamaican woman writer there was. And Elliot Bliss was a white woman who was born in Jamaica, and she had gone on to have a really famous career as a writer in London. And a couple of things are interesting about Elliot Bliss, including the fact that she was openly lesbian her entire life. Of course, they tried to marry her off to one white man or another in Jamaica, and that just did not work out. And Michaela Calderaro was involved in this recovery project on Elliot Bliss. If you had a straw and touched me, I would have keeled over in front of Bob's Library in New York when Michaela started telling me all these things. I was like, you've got to be kidding, Michaela. A 1903 white woman lesbian writer from Jamaica. I've never heard of such a thing in my life. And not only that, but she had been quite well known and had published some books and was more as well known, if not more well known, than Jean Reese, White Sargasso Sea at the time, talking about the ways in which it is so easy. It is so easy for women to become invisible. It is so easy.
Right, because in fact, Jane Reese was forgotten, except for she had Max Ford kind of championing her. Otherwise, sorry.
No, but even then she became invisible. What happened to Jean Reese was White Sargasso Sea. Right? That's what happened to Jean Reese. And so Michaela kept going at this, and not only did she, I actually was able to find, if my house was in better state, I could show you the 2 published volumes from Elliot Bliss, but Michaela has found volumes of fiction and poetry left unpublished by Elliot Bliss. And she just recently got the biography of Elliot Bliss published. And she's the last person I interview in this book. I'm just so thrilled because Elliot Bliss was lost to us, and Michaela brought her back. So thanks for asking about Elliot Bliss.
No, she's really compelling. That interview is a really compelling interview, and it made me also think about what this position, as I was born in Haiti, and I'm a white woman born in Haiti, and my early childhood was there. And I have that, the Creole problem. I'm not from there, but I'm not, I always felt like an outsider. So I'm really interested in reading, reading that. her work.
It's a slim biography. What I hope, I'll just talk this out into the universe, is that probably the University of the West Indies Press, who knows, whichever press, will work with Michaela to bring Elliot Bliss's books back into publications, the ones that were published, and the ones that Michaela has found. You know, that is my hope, you know, because Elliot Bliss is an ace writer, very, very good. And to know that this Michaela has dedicated her entire career to her from Italy, it is quite an amazing story. So I hope a publisher does that.
Yeah, it's a great story. I loved when you talked about basically the Caribbean aesthetics and having this sort of diversity of voices, because there's all kinds of cultures mixed into the Caribbean, not just, you know, there's Asian and there's Indian and, you know, so, and I also really enjoyed the story, but I think you might have told me when you were here that Audubon, James Audubon, can you tell that story about how you found out about James Audubon?
My favorite guy.
Yeah.
My favorite guy.
He's complicated.
He's complicated. He's very complicated. You see, I could have told someone that John James Audubon was from the Caribbean, right? Even though his roots are French, right? I remember looking at his works and thinking, well, first things first, let's back up for a moment. John James Audubon is known as the father of American ornithology, right? For his Birds of America, which is a masterpiece. There's no two questions about that, right? But his parents are from France, right? And so his father was born in France and his mother is French as well. But he himself was born in Haiti, right? And so when I remember always, all my life, I've looked at his Birds of America and I would see the Caribbean in them. I was like, but this doesn't, you know. So one year I got a grant and I went to New Orleans, and everywhere in New Orleans is John James Audubon. The Audubon this, blah, 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 blah. And it so happened that the summer that I was there, an institution had just gotten a whole folio, and I begged them, excuse me, please, can I come and look at the folio? And found out that he had lived there, John James Audubon. And looking at the folio, I started to research John James Audubon and realized that, found some archival work where he talked about seeing these wonderful parrots flying in Haiti, and could never forget these parrots and these birds, and all of that stayed with him and started to, it was when he went to New Orleans, which is
like the tropics.
Right?
Yeah.
That he started his masterwork, right? So he was, for all intents and purposes, in the Caribbean again, when he was in New Orleans. But he's an interesting guy because he did, you know, he was forcefully racist, for somebody who might very well be Black. Might be passing. Right? There is a lot of evidence to suggest that he himself might be passing. Right? So he's a very complicated, very, very complicated character. Very complicated character.
And I found that with the story of the parrots, I remember as a child in Haiti, big flights of pink flamingos from the harbor. They don't exist anymore. It's too polluted and degraded, but I have that memory of that place, which doesn't exist anymore in my, anyway, deeply ingrained. One of the things that I came up with that I thought was really interesting that you talked about was this single story concept, because here you have 16 Jamaican women writers and there's not a single story. They're all different and they all are rich and have all kinds of details. And what you point out is that so often Black women especially are seen as having allowed to have one narrative. And you you brought that up in the context of the art show that you yourself did, the Female Sexual Desires project. I thought that was a really powerful point, and I'd love you to talk about that because it was, it was well said.
Right. As Gwen mentioned, I am, in addition to being a writer, a visual artist. And my residency at Dora Maar was as a visual artist. And when I was in grad school, I became very interested in female sexual desires. I thought that male desires are everywhere around us. They are used to sell cars, they are used to sell cigarettes. The heterosexual desire is what I'm talking about here. It's everywhere. But what was the nature of female sexual desire? And so I went on an odyssey, a 3-year journey to figure the nature of female sexual desire and to make a whole body of work around what I found. In fact, that's how I ended up at the Huffington Post writing about it. I conceptualized the project as a we girl project. We girls were going to find out now, right, what female sexual desires was. I had never seen anyone try to do that before. Lots of women artists work on the female body, but not in areas of to show it as in pleasure, right, and desire and sexuality. Well, this didn't turn out quite like I thought it would. Not that I didn't make the work that I wanted it to make, and you can find out all about it by Googling my name and Huffington Post. But just the response that I was getting back from this, which is that Black women, for the most part, had nothing to say to me because they were dealing with hypersexualized images. And white women were enraged at me, right? And for the longest time, I couldn't understand what the nature of the rage was until one woman said to me, female sexual desires is ours. Police brutality is yours.
Right.
And I said, oh.
Yeah. Really intense. Yeah.
Oh, I got it, right? Right. And I'd also done this thing of speaking as a woman in that project and not as a Black woman, right?
Right, just as a woman, right?
Yeah, just as a woman. And I said, oh, it didn't stop me from doing the work that I was doing, but it clarified that there were certain areas that women, that it's all intersectionality again, that women felt that, white women felt was theirs, desire, beauty, this kind of stuff.
Right.
And that there were things that were mine, police brutality, blah, blah, blah.
Right, you had your story, that was it, yeah.
I don't know why white women don't think police brutality is their story, but so there you go.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting what we take on as we think, okay, that's the story I get to tell, or that's the story I don't get to tell. I mean, there's all kinds of censorship that we inherit and that we absorb and that we, don't question, which is really
unfortunately. Unfortunately.
No, so that I thought that was in a way it shows part of what your work is. Even so, the work of this book is bringing all these voices together and letting them each have each of them speak. Also, the work that you do as an artist is bringing together. Even the work you did here at Dora Maar is this recovery work. So even as you're doing your own work, it's always about bringing this multiplicity of voices back to speak. So I think there's definitely a through line through all of this for you. But
I feel frustrated. I'm always running this. I always feel like should I just focus on my work? There's always that tension, There's always that tension.
But I think the tension, it's a good tension to have because, it's what you were, we as women, we both take care and also care for us and hopefully care for ourselves. I mean, it's sometimes it's good to step out of ourselves. Sometimes that's the best move strategically as an artist. I don't know. It feeds us, it's finding that balance between the depletion and
There's a lot of discussion now as to why women who are artists, our careers only take off as we get older, because and it also falls down as we get older as well. But we do so much care work.
Care work, absolutely. Yeah.
We do a lot of care work.
Care work for our families and and the communities. Yeah.
We do a lot of care work.
And I think that was a really beautiful thing that was somewhere, I wrote it in my notes, but I don't know if I'm going to find it. Something about maybe we need to rewrite history not in terms of like the warriors and the empires and the big strong, but also this care work is part of that history, right?
It's a huge part. It's a huge part of this history.
Right.
What women have to do, I mean, we don't get the luxury of just walking away.
Right. Right.
We don't.
Yeah. Okay, we are already getting near the end of our time, so I want to open it up. If there's anyone in our group that would like to ask a question, please. Let me see if there's one here. Oh, someone asked, what were the occupations of the women that you interviewed?
Okay. Women had, let me look throughout the book. So, so Jean DaCosta went on to be an academic. Velma Pollard, academic. Christine Craig had a very varied occupation, but I think most notably for her, she did a lot of work on women's issues, trying to get women organized, trying to get women rights, Olive Senior was an editor for many years. Lorna Goodison worked with the library and then became an academic. Marcia Douglas, academic, and Margaret Lim is working with the ministry. Millicent Graham is in an industry unrelated, I think it's IT. Keisha Gay, I think, is in PR, something like that. Carrie Young is doing a lot of youth. She did a lot of youth work here in London. Pam Mordecai did everything, but is today an academic. Sharon Leach is at the Jamaica Observer. A huge shout out to Sharon Leach, because if it were not for Sharon Leach, there would not be a book. She published these interviews, most of them, and we continue with the interview series starting again this Sunday.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Right. Tanya Shirley is an academic. Opal Palmer is an academic. Patricia Powell is an academic. Shara McCollum is an academic. And the wonderful Michela Calderaro, who is in Venice, in Italy, is an academic.
So someone asked, are you still doing your writing needlework?
I wonder who that might be. Somebody that I met in Provence, those wonderful 6 weeks. Let me let you in on some of the things that I have forthcoming. In the fall, I should be taking part in 2 major exhibitions. One that both of them has to do with ceramics, and both of them has to do with needlework. And they are both here. One is in London and one is in Manchester. One is a biennial. So I'm very, very interested in that. And my needlework not only continues, but it proliferates. It grows and it grows and it grows.
That's good.
It grows.
That's wonderful. I think this question of the different genres, I think most of them were fiction writers and poets, right? I feel like,
I think there might be, yeah, I think so. I think so.
yeah, there was quite a few poets and quite a few fiction, short
Yeah.
story, and novelists
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in the group. Yeah.
I think so.
Let me see. If the one last question, I think we have to. Which one is in London? I think that's we're speaking to your exhibition. What's the exhibition that's going to be in London?
So I guess I can start talking about my exhibition that's upcoming in London. And I see Janice here. Hi, Janice. I remember running into a Jamaican in Province. I was like, what?
Yeah, she says it's me.
When I was growing up in Jamaica, my grandmother, doesn't it always go back to my grandmother?
Yeah.
Doesn't it always go back to non-such? That's what somebody said to me the other day. They say, Jacqueline, it always goes back to your grandmother. It always goes back to non-such, which is a tiny district in Portland in Jamaica. She had a fantastic china cabinet and chinaware, porcelainware. And I remember this as a kid growing up in Jamaica. And I started collaging and making porcelains that would tell Black women's story. But I wanted to keep the delicacy of porcelain and the beauty, but reframe the narrative, right? Because Sèvres in France, am I saying that right?
Yes, Evelyn, yeah.
Or is it Sèvres? I don't know.
No, Sèvres.
Sèvres. And the porcelain companies here, their history is tied intimately to plantations and to slavery and whatnot. Not that they participated in them, but that those were their clients, right? Because those were the people who had the money to pay for it. So I'm making these dishes, I was making collages of them. And Set Lewisham came and they wanted to do that along with Jamaican women's embroidery, gorgeous stuff.
Nice.
And at the same time, the V&A and the ceramics biennial said, you know what, we will put these on ceramics for you, So
nice.
It's wonderful.
Very exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. And thank you so much, Jacqueline, for this book, for the work that you've done making it and all the great interviews. And I even didn't get to the part I wanted to talk about how what's really interesting about this book is at the end, each of the people you interviewed asks you a question, which it's a beautiful structure. So I really highly recommend it to everyone and, spread the word. And I will send everyone who's participated an email with the link of where you can purchase it. And also the recording of this will eventually, when I get my act together, be on our website and on our YouTube.
Thank you so much, Gwen.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care, Gwen. Bye-bye.
Bye.